It is a real pleasure to be here tonight. It's one of those things that when we look at, how do we keep community identity? And, probably most of us over the years have had the opportunity to shop for houses. With the exception of farmers who are pretty much staying where their land is, a lot of people with various jobs are looking at, okay, what house should I live in? And sometimes, what town do I live in? Just to kind of share some of my experiences, I've lived in Carroll, Iowa. When I graduated from college, I moved down to Carroll, Iowa, moved to New Ulm, Minnesota. From New Ulm, I went to Little Falls, and from Little Falls came down to Casson. So I've moved around really in these two states and visiting various communities around and making decisions on where I live. And every community kind of has their own identity. When I think of Carroll, Iowa, and I think if you ask a lot of people, because when I moved down to Iowa, I had my choice of anywhere in 7 counties to live. Well, that's a lot of towns. And you got to pick a place on where you're actually going to call home in your job. It's not just the house, but where do you want to live? I have to share with you, when I went down to Iowa and started looking at some of the communities, I went to one community, believe it was like Jefferson town, right in that area. And really, if you've been to many of those Iowa towns, they have the old town square, and you've got that type of situation, very much a picturesque Iowa community. That's north of the Covered Bridge area. You've been there. Unfortunately, when I went there that day, a house had burned down two blocks down from the fire department the day before. And the house burned down before the fire department got there. Kind of told me something a little bit about the community. And I started thinking, okay, is this a community where I wanted to live in? I went down the road a little bit further, and that's when I found Carroll, Iowa. And Carroll had been a very successful town. Oftentimes, people called it the salesman town. Because if you're at Carroll, you're about the equal distance from Des Moines and Omaha and Sioux City, Iowa, and a number of the other towns. And Ames isn't all that far away. So what you found was that community was the salesman town. The other thing that had happened is they had gotten some community dollars to do some improvements in the city. And they had done such a good job. They had converted their downtown into a downtown outdoor mall. They did such a good job, the government actually, since they figured that they got under budget, they said, here, you keep 80% of what you did under budget and do something for the community. And they made a community center that had indoor Olympic-sized pool, racquetball courts, basketball courts, everything in there. When I lived there, membership for the year, including the locker, was $10 for the year. I mean, it was a nice community. And I always remember it had, 2 golf courses for a guy who likes to golf, and learning to golf at that time was wonderful. But just the fact that the community had succeeded in doing downtown redevelopment and then added this on top of it because they came under budget. New Ulm. And I'm going to ask you, what is it about New Ulm that comes to mind if I mention that town? There's a brewery. German Heritage. Those are 2 of the things that really stick out in that community. I mean, it had was it Hohenstein, I think, many years ago, and it has Shells, yet still running, and it has German Heritage. Now, why did I choose? When I came back to Minnesota, I was told I could live anywhere between Marshall and Red Wing in kind of the southern part of the state. Now, the one thing that I didn't mention about Carroll, Iowa, is though it has a German heritage to some extent, there wasn't a single person I ran into in that town that could pronounce the name Schwartau when they'd look at it. So whenever I go to the doctor's office, they'd call out, Bruce, whatever your name is. Well, when I went looking for towns, I mean, I came up to Minnesota and I thought, okay, where should I live? And so I actually went to different towns, Mankato and several others. And I went to actually a beer stube for lunch one day in New Ulm. In the booth next to me, the people were speaking German. I decided at that point that's the town I was going to live in, because I was not going to ever run into the problem in that town of no one running into, how do you say that name? You know, with all the German names you've got in that community, that just wasn't an issue. And they do celebrate German heritage. Little Falls, you know, has its own kind of unique heritage with the river running through it, Lindbergh coming from Little Falls, and a few things like that. Now, when we think about communities in this area, if I were to say Chatfield, tell me what you would say is kind of the community identity. What do you associate with Chatfield?
They call themselves the Chosen Valley.
They're Chosen Valley. Is there a library there? Okay. Brass band library. Okay, and I mean, I think of probably the marching band, or isn't there a marching band that? And I mean, for years, you know, I live in Casson. At least that's one of the things I had heard for a long time was really about the marching band at Chatfield. One of the things I notice about that town is that you go through there, and you know they have celebrations and different things, but they celebrate it by putting the flags on the lampposts. You know certain things. They identify their heritage, and they talk about the things that are important to their community when you go there. Now, tell me about Bel Chester. Give me the community identity for Bel Chester. That's right. Not every community, you know, every community has a different area that you'd probably say is their area of influence. Bel Chester, you probably wouldn't have anyone say what community identity there unless they live probably within 10 miles of Bel Chester. And so, you know, that's one of the things we look at. If I were to ask you what is the heritage or what's the identity of Harmony, what would it be? You know, the Amish community is definitely one of the things. Anything else? Niagara Cave, you know, what advertised as one of the 5 most beautiful caves in the United States or something like that. It's one of those things that we look at. Every community has its identity. But what we're seeing is communities are now looking at, we need to do economic development. You know, we need to grow. We need to have, you know, we've got EDAs, economic development authorities, and committees within communities saying, what can we do to grow? We need to have enterprises here so that people can make money, stay in the community, have stores to shop. Now, one of the things we're looking at then is, you know, how can we maintain our identity and still grow? And that's one of the issues that I deal with in communities all over southern Minnesota, is how do we do economic development, and how do we make our identity known? You know, at times it's important. You know, some things can, you know, one of the things we mentioned, heritage, like in New Ulm, the German heritage. If I were to say Rochester, what's the community identity for Rochester? Mayo Clinic. You know, it's Med City. Austin, what is the identity for Austin? The packing plant, Hormel. So what you see is that sometimes a community is identified by the businesses that are in the community. Sometimes it's by its heritage. What is the other major thing that probably keeps a community together? Topography can be part of it at times. The schools and the churches are, and particularly the schools, it's where you have more gathering of people within a community more than anything else. What's the last thing a community wants to do? is combine with another school district and lose the school building in your town, because they're so afraid that that's going to end the community vitality within that community. So all those things kind of play a part in what we're doing.